The early morning mist clings to the rolling hills of northeastern France, curling through the woods and fields like ghostly fingers. Dawn breaks over the small village of Valmy, and yet, beneath the serene fog, the continent trembles. Here, in September 1792, a battle unlike any other is about to unfold, a battle that will decide not just the fate of a single kingdom, but the survival of a fledgling republic. The Prussian army, seasoned, disciplined, and seemingly unstoppable, has marched with precision to crush revolutionary France. Opposite them stands a force less polished, yet burning with an unyielding spirit: citizen soldiers, volunteers, and National Guardsmen, inspired not by titles or gold, but by liberty, equality, and the chance to defend their homeland. This is the decisive Battle of Valmy, the moment where the French revolutionary troops would repel the Prussian forces, preserving the nascent French Republic and altering the course of European history forever. Empires would falter, monarchs would quake, and the ideals of a revolution would gain a lifeline in the blood-soaked fields of Champagne. The world has changed in a heartbeat. If this shocking turn of history already sends chills down your spine, hit subscribe and join us as we unravel every twist and battle. Share your first thoughts below before we step onto the smoke-filled battlefield. Smoke curls from campfires, the scent of wet earth, cannon powder, and distant fear hangs in the air. Soldiers clutch muskets with trembling hands. A drummer boy's uncertain beat echoes off the hills. Somewhere, a villager peers from behind a shuttered window, eyes wide with terror and awe. Could these citizen soldiers truly stand against the disciplined might of Europe's finest army? Could the ideals of a revolution survive the wrath of kings? History itself waits, holding its breath, as the first volleys of gunfire will soon rend the silence. By 1792, France was a nation teetering on the knife edge of chaos and transformation. The revolution, which had erupted just 3 years earlier, had dismantled centuries of monarchy and privilege. King Louis XVI, once considered the unshakable pivot of European power, now sat uneasily on a throne stripped of authority, his crown shadowed by suspicion and revolutionary fervor. Across Europe, monarchs and aristocrats watched France with mounting alarm, whispering in corridors of Vienna and Berlin about the danger of contagion, the peril of ideas that could ignite similar upheavals. In their own kingdoms, the causes of the looming war were as much political as territorial. France's declaration of the Republic's intent to protect revolutionary ideals collided violently with the ambitions of foreign powers. The Prussian army, led by the Duke of Brunswick, a man known as the Tiger of Brunswick for his ruthless efficiency, advanced with grim determination. Austria, still smarting from earlier losses and wary of revolutionary contagion, coordinated cautiously with their Prussian allies, seeking to quell the upheaval before it spread further into the heart of Europe. For them, the stakes were clear: a decisive strike into French soil, and the revolution could be crushed before it matured into a threat to kings and emperors alike. Inside France, the revolutionary government known as the National Convention grappled with its own uncertainty. Its armies were a patchwork of volunteers, seasoned soldiers who had survived prior campaigns, and local militias, bound more by ideology than discipline. The renowned General François Kellermann, commanding the Army of the North, had studied European tactics meticulously. Alongside him, General François Kellermann, a veteran of earlier French campaigns, brought an unshakable presence to the ranks, his calm demeanor a stabilizing force amid chaos. Meanwhile, rumors swirled among the populous stories of Prussian brutality, of entire villages razed in prior skirmishes, of cities burned. Civilians whispered anxiously about what might come, the air thick with fear and anticipation. The preceding months had been tumultuous. France's internal turmoil was matched by external pressure. The Brunswick Manifesto, issued by the Duke himself, threatened severe punishment for the revolutionaries and promised protection for the king should the army succeed. Instead of cowing the French populace, it ignited a fierce determination. In villages and towns across Champagne, citizens armed themselves, men and women alike, knowing the survival of their nation and their very ideals depended on them. Troop numbers at the cusp of battle reveal the David versus Goliath nature of the encounter. The French assembled roughly 36,000 men, a combination of experienced regulars and raw volunteers. Opposing them, the Prussians counted near 34,000, a highly trained and disciplined force, their drill and battlefield experience seemingly outweighing numbers alone. Geography would prove crucial. The gentle hills around Valmy, dotted with orchards and villages, provided vantage points and natural cover that could neutralize the Prussian advantage in mobility. And artillery. Political, social, and economic conditions were inseparable from military strategy. France's revolution had dismantled the old hierarchies, replacing them with committees, citizen councils, and a fervent sense of egalitarianism. Soldiers marched not because of orders alone, but because of ideology. And that energy imbued the ranks with a sense of purpose that professional armies sometimes lack. Civilians contributed as guides, cooks, and scouts, aware that the very ground they stood upon would soon be a crucible of history. Legends from the period survive in letters and journals. A baker in Saint-Brieuc reportedly loaded cartridges while humming revolutionary songs, her hands smeared with dough and powder. A young artillery officer, barely 18, wrote home about the thrill and terror of watching French battalions stand their ground against Prussian cavalry, describing the fire and smoke rising like a living mountain. These narratives, small in isolation, collectively weave the tension that would explode at Valmy, visualizing the theater of war. Imagine maps drawn hastily in candlelight, troop movements traced over villages and roads, alliances confirmed through secret messengers. From the 20th of August to early September 1792, skirmishes and maneuvers across the northeastern frontier set the stage. Every march and countermarch, every scouting report, built toward that fateful day in the Champagne Hills. France's survival, its revolutionary dream, rested on a knife's edge. As the French and Prussian forces closed in, both sides understood what hung in the balance. The Prussians, with their reputation for ruthless efficiency, expected an easy victory that would pave the way for a swift march to Paris. The French, though less seasoned, drew strength from purpose and conviction, an unquantifiable force that would soon turn the tide. The whispers of civilians, the careful calculations of generals, and the tension in the ranks all converged, threading suspense through the fields and villages of Valmy. The night before the battle, Valmy was alive with a nervous energy, a tension that hummed through the air like static before a storm. French troops, some barely trained, others veterans of earlier campaigns, moved cautiously among the encampments, their muskets glinting in the dim lantern light. The air smelled of damp earth, sweat, and gunpowder, a scent that would become inseparable from the memory of that day. General François Kellermann, a man whose presence radiated authority despite his graying hair, walked among the ranks, inspecting artillery positions, ensuring that every cannon, every musket, was at the ready. His calm demeanor steadied men who wavered between anticipation and fear. The French army was a patchwork of forces, National Guardsmen from Paris, enthusiastic volunteers from provincial towns, and seasoned regulars who had survived the wars against Austria and Prussia in previous campaigns. Each unit had a distinct rhythm, each man a different story, yet they shared a singular resolve. Officers drilled formations into their troops, not just with commands, but with stories of French valor and revolutionary purpose. One young sergeant, scribbling notes in the mud, whispered tales of past skirmishes, reminding his men that courage could turn even the direst odds. Logistics became a theater of its own. Wagons rolled along dirt roads, carrying barrels of powder, cannonballs, and rations. Scouts raced ahead to report enemy positions, while couriers dashed back and forth, delivering orders and updates with urgency that matched the pounding of soldiers' hearts. The terrain of Valmy, a gentle rise of hills overlooking fields and orchards, was studied meticulously. French cannons were positioned on elevated ground, their muzzles peering over the ridges like watchful sentinels. The orchards offered cover for infantry and musketeers, while narrow roads funneled potential Prussian advances, giving the defenders a subtle advantage despite their lack of formal training. Psychological preparation was as crucial as physical readiness. Revolutionary banners fluttered in the dawn breeze, red, white, and blue, symbols of liberty that inspired both awe and determination. Soldiers performed small rituals before battle. Some kissed trinkets or talismans. Others silently recited vows to protect their homeland and ideals. The sense of shared purpose infused the camp with energy that discipline alone could not create. For many, it was the first time they had marched not for a king's glory, but for their own convictions, and that distinction set their hearts ablaze. Meanwhile, the Prussian forces approached with their hallmark efficiency. Led by the Duke of Brunswick, officers inspected every battalion, ensuring precision and cohesion. Their artillery was formidable, disciplined, and well-trained. Horses pranced nervously, yet obediently, while infantry lines were tested and retested under the icy September skies. Brunswick's strategic mind plotted every potential French maneuver, but even he was wary of the unpredictable energy of revolutionary forces. His intelligence reports hinted at French enthusiasm, rumors of spirited resistance, and the possibility that morale could prove as decisive as musket fire. Anecdotes from the encampments reveal the human dimension behind the strategy. A young French drummer boy, barely 12, practiced rhythms that would signal attacks and retreats, his small hands trembling over the taut drumhead. A baker from Châlons-en-Champagne pressed into service as a makeshift artillery loader, mused that if France fell, her children would inherit a world stripped of hope. Such moments, seemingly minor, knit together the invisible threads of resolve that would hold the line. When cannon fire shattered the dawn, reconnaissance was continuous. French scouts crept through the orchards, observing Prussian tents, noting the arrangement of cannon batteries, and reporting every minor movement. The Prussians, confident yet cautious, dispatched their own spies, seeking to anticipate Kellermann's strategies. It was a silent chess game, played in the shadows, with the lives of tens of thousands hanging on each decision. Cinematic visuals of the pre-battle scene would show rows of soldiers assembling under fog-laden hills, officers consulting maps by lantern light, and the steady rotation of cannons being loaded and tested. The air vibrates with the low murmur of human anxiety and mechanical preparation. The rattle of gun carriages, the scrape of boots on dirt, the occasional shout of a commander correcting a formation. The tension is palpable, a prelude to the thunder that will soon erupt across the Champagne plains. As dawn approached, both armies drew closer to the inevitable. The French forces, though lacking the polish of the Prussian battalions, were unified by purpose. The Prussians, though methodical and disciplined, faced an unknown the fervor of men and women willing to defend liberty. With every ounce of their being, across the hills, the wind carried whispers of courage, fear, and expectation, as if the land itself held its breath for the eruption that would decide the fate of a nation. The stage was set. Every movement, every glance, every whispered order contributed to the tension that now coiled like a spring over Valmy. In a few hours, the earth would shake with the roar of musketry and cannon, and the ideals of a revolution would be tested against the iron discipline of one of Europe's finest armies. The night of preparation, the meticulous planning, and the shared determination of citizen soldiers had built a crescendo of anticipation that demanded release in the fury of battle. The morning of the 20th of September 1790 dawned with a delicate light, as though nature itself was unsure whether to illuminate heroism or tragedy. A thin mist clung to the Champagne hills, veiling the lines of troops right across the fields of Valmy. On one ridge, General François Kellermann rode along the French lines, observing muskets and cannons, checking that each position could unleash its deadly potential. Opposite him, the Duke of Brunswick inspected the disciplined Prussian battalions, his cold gaze sweeping the horizon, calculating angles of advance and the deadly coordination of infantry and artillery. At 8 a.m., the first cannon fire shattered the morning calm. French artillery, positioned strategically on the heights of the Valmy ridge, erupted with deafening thunder. Smoke coiled skyward, mingling with the mist, and the air became thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder. Brunswick's Prussians responded immediately, their own cannonade a disciplined rhythm of destruction, each volley seeking to break the resolve of the citizen soldiers below. The sound was overwhelming, a cacophony that rattled nerves and sent flocks of startled birds into the sky. French musket volleys, fired in disciplined but irregular rhythm, peppered the advancing Prussian columns. Though many soldiers were inexperienced, their determination compensated for lack of training. A young volunteer, barely 17, recalled later how he gripped his musket, heart hammering, yet felt the strange exhilaration of standing shoulder to shoulder with comrades, equally committed to the revolutionary cause. Across the battlefield, cannonballs tore through trees and orchard walls, splintering wood and earth alike, yet the French lines held. The Prussian advance faltered when faced with the unexpected resilience of French artillery and the strategic use of terrain. Rolling hills funneled the attackers into narrow spaces, making them vulnerable to concentrated musket fire. Kellermann's calm yet decisive leadership proved crucial. Observing a Prussian regiment attempting to flank his artillery, he dispatched reserves to the ridge, positioning them to maximize both firepower and morale. The psychological impact was immediate. French troops, seeing their general actively directing reinforcements, steadied their nerves, while the Prussians faced the unsettling realization that the French were neither disorganized nor afraid. As the hours dragged on, the battle became a test of endurance. Sunlight, piercing through smoke, glinted off cannon barrels and bayonets. Soldiers swayed under the dual weight of fatigue and fear, each man acutely aware that a single mistake could invite disaster. Amid the chaos, human stories emerged. A drummer boy continued his rhythm despite a cannonball splintering the ground nearby. An artilleryman braved shrapnel to reload his cannon, and a young officer, noticing a wavering company, ran forward, brandishing his saber and shouting orders that cut through the roar. By midday, the Prussians had launched multiple assaults on the French right flank, attempting to force a breakthrough. Brunswick, frustrated by the stubborn resistance, ordered heavy artillery bombardments and directed infantry to exploit perceived weaknesses. Yet every maneuver met the resolute fire of the French, whose position on the high ground and ability to rotate fresh troops into the line frustrated the enemy. Kellermann, aware that morale and perception often outweighed pure numbers, capitalized on this advantage, signaling with his trumpet, rallying the men, and ensuring that every volley reinforced the impression of an unyielding, disciplined force. The psychological warfare became as vital as musket fire. French soldiers sang revolutionary songs, their voices carrying over the smoke-laden fields, an audible defiance that unnerved the Prussians. Civilians who had gathered in distant orchards reported hearing the songs and seeing the steadfast faces of French troops, remarking on the almost mythic courage displayed by men who, only days before, had been ordinary citizens. Brunswick, recognizing that further attacks might become futile, ordered careful consolidation, maintaining formations, but refraining from reckless assaults that could result in catastrophic losses. In the afternoon, the battle reached its turning point. French artillery, massed and accurately aimed, began to hammer the Prussian lines, inflicting unexpected casualties and disrupting formations. Musket volleys raked through exposed flanks, and officers shouted orders amid clouds of smoke and dust. Reports from the battlefield described the ground littered with debris and wounded men, cries of pain mingling with the whistle of cannon shot. Yet French resolve did not waver. Soldiers continued to reload, advance, and hold their positions, driven by the larger purpose of defending the revolution itself. At the human level, small acts of heroism defined the day. A sergeant, seeing a fellow soldier fall beneath the weight of a cannonball, dragged him to safety despite enemy fire. A young volunteer, inspired by Kellermann's presence, stood atop a small ridge, rallying his comrades with a fervent shout, his courage contagious. Civilians, too, witnessed and recorded these moments, their stories transforming into legends that would inspire future generations. By late afternoon, the Prussian army, though still formidable, began to withdraw. Brunswick, assessing the battlefield and wary of French artillery, decided that further attacks would risk unacceptable losses. The French, holding firm and aware of their symbolic and strategic victory, allowed the enemy to retreat, their cannons signaling both triumph and warning. The once quiet hills now bore the scars of cannon fire, the churned earth and shattered trees a testament to the ferocity of the encounter. The Battle of Valmy, though lasting only a few hours, had changed everything. France had proven that citizen soldiers, driven by ideology and protected by clever use of terrain and artillery, could stand against the disciplined armies of Europe. The smoke of battle drifted across the Champagne landscape, mingling with the lingering echoes of courage, fear, and determination. On that ridge, the ideals of liberty were defended with both human grit and tactical mastery, establishing a precedent that would resonate across Europe. As the smoke slowly lifted from the hills of Valmy, the battlefield revealed a scene of both relief and devastation. The ground, churned and scarred by cannon fire, lay littered with debris-broken muskets, splintered wheels, and the abandoned equipment of soldiers forced to retreat. For the French, the sight was bittersweet. Victory had been won, yet the cost in blood and exhaustion was undeniable. Many of the volunteers, though unharmed physically, bore the weight of trauma, their hands trembling as they tended to comrades, carried the wounded, or simply stared in disbelief at the chaos they had survived. General Kellermann moved along the lines, surveying the aftermath with a solemn, almost paternal gaze. His calm demeanor had guided the troops through the battle, and now he was witness to its toll. Reports indicated roughly 300 French casualties in number that, though significant, paled in comparison to the hundreds of Prussian dead and wounded strewn across the fields. Brunswick's forces, disciplined but shocked by the unanticipated resilience of their opponents, began an organized withdrawal, leaving the French in control of the Champagne Hills. Though the Prussians retained their military honor, the psychological blow was enormous. Their advance had been halted, their feared superiority diminished, and the revolution they sought to crush had survived another day. The civilian perspective added layers of humanity to the victory. Villagers cautiously emerged from their homes, eyes wide at the aftermath. Some had fled during the cannon fire, hiding in cellars or behind orchard walls. Others had observed from a distance, documenting the courage of citizen soldiers in whispered accounts. A local baker, who had supplied bread to the troops, noted later that the air smelled not just of gunpowder, but of hope, a hope that their fledgling republic might endure. Children, clutching the hands of parents, peered at the battered landscape, unaware that history had just pivoted on this ridge. In the hours following the battle, prisoner handling and medical care became urgent. French soldiers moved among the wounded, both friend and foe, administering aid where possible. Officers organized triage stations, using crude but effective methods to stabilize injuries, while civilians assisted in transporting the most critically wounded to nearby villages. The scene was chaotic, yet remarkable in its demonstration of emerging revolutionary principles. Even enemies were treated with a measure of dignity, a stark contrast to the indiscriminate slaughter often characteristic of European warfare. Territorial implications, though subtle in the immediate aftermath, were profound. Valmy's hills remained under French control, denying the Prussians the strategic vantage they had sought. Roads remained open for French maneuvers, and communication lines to Paris were secured. News of the victory traveled swiftly, carried by messengers and couriers to the National Convention. The atmosphere in the capital shifted from anxiety to cautious optimism. The Republic, fragile and embattled, had endured its first major test against the armies of monarchs, and the morale boost was immeasurable. Amid the practicalities, the psychological impact was deeply felt. French soldiers, once uncertain and hesitant, now held a renewed sense of purpose. Stories of bravery circulated rapidly. The young drummer who continued to signal through the artillery fire, the sergeant who rescued a comrade beneath a storm of cannonballs, and the volunteers who stood firm when disciplined Prussian units faltered. These narratives not only strengthened camaraderie among the troops, but also forged the beginnings of a revolutionary mythology, embedding Valmy into the national consciousness as a symbol of courage, ingenuity, and unity. Leaders reacted with a mixture of relief and strategic calculation. Kellermann, though praised for his command, immediately began planning for potential counterattacks. Aware that Valmy was a victory, not an endpoint, Dumouriez, ever the strategist, recognized the battle's broader significance. The preservation of French revolutionary ideals was now tangible, and the army's ability to stand against seasoned European powers would inform both future campaigns and the confidence of the citizenry. For the Prussians, the retreat was sobering. Brunswick's assessment noted both tactical missteps and the unpredictable psychological resilience of revolutionary forces, a warning that France could not be underestimated. Regardless of its apparent inexperience. By dusk, the battlefield quieted, leaving an eerie serenity. Cannons lay dormant, smoke lingered in the valleys, and the sounds of battle faded into the whisper of the wind through shattered trees. The French had defended not only their positions, but the very notion that a republic could survive against a coalition of kings. For those who witnessed it, soldiers, officers, and civilians alike, the day would be etched into memory as a turning point, the moment when courage, ideology, and clever strategy triumphed over fearsome reputation and military tradition. The echoes of Valmy stretched far beyond the scarred hills of Champagne, rippling across France and Europe like the aftershock of an unseen quake. Strategically, the battle marked the first decisive demonstration that the Revolutionary Army could resist. Europe's finest forces, monarchs who had once viewed France's upheaval with disdain, now reconsidered their assumptions. This was not merely a temporary disorder, but a force resilient enough to challenge long-standing military and political hierarchies. The Prussian retreat undermined the aura of invincibility that European armies had long enjoyed, sending shockwaves through Vienna, Berlin, and beyond. Politically, Valmy injected the National Convention and the fledgling French Republic with a surge of legitimacy. The revolution, previously threatened by internal dissent and external intervention, gained breathing room to consolidate its ideals. Paris celebrated cautiously but with fervor. Revolutionary leaders paraded the flags of Valmy through the streets, and songs of victory replaced whispers of fear. General Kellermann was lauded as a hero, his calm leadership and judicious use of artillery cited in speeches, pamphlets, and sketches. Dumouriez's strategic acumen was similarly acknowledged, his combination of terrain mastery and psychological insight studied by military thinkers. For generations to come, the social consequences were equally profound. Ordinary citizens, once uncertain of their place in the Revolutionary Army, now felt a tangible connection to the Republic's survival. Volunteers returned home with stories of courage and sacrifice, their experiences fueling civic pride and a sense of shared destiny. Monuments and commemorative markers would later appear near Valmy, ensuring that the lessons of courage, unity, and ideological commitment endured beyond the battlefield. Villagers, bakers, and artisans who had supported the army became part of the revolutionary mythology, their seemingly small contributions elevated in history as acts of national significance. Economically, the preservation of the Republic allowed France to stabilize enough to continue mobilizing resources. For the broader conflict, the threat of Prussian occupation had jeopardized food supplies, trade, and regional governance. But Valmy's outcome ensured that local economies remained under revolutionary control. Merchants, farmers, and artisans resumed their work with cautious optimism, knowing that the Republic had demonstrated the capacity to defend itself against external threats. In essence, the battle was not only a military victory, but also a preservation of the structures, however fragile, that sustained French society. Culturally, the narrative of Valmy became intertwined with revolutionary identity. Art, literature, and songs began to celebrate the courage of citizen soldiers, emphasizing that ordinary people, not just kings or generals, could alter the course of history. The concept of national duty shifted from loyalty to monarchs toward loyalty to ideals, to the notion of liberty as a cause worth risking life and limb. This cultural reframing reverberated across Europe, inspiring both admiration and fear in neighboring states. Admiration for the audacity and unity of France, fear of revolutionary contagion undermining the traditional hierarchies of power. Strategically, Valmy set a precedent for defensive operations against numerically and tactically superior foes. The French demonstrated that well-positioned artillery, effective use of terrain, and high morale could counterbalance training and discipline. Military theorists in subsequent decades would reference Valmy as an example of how ideological commitment and tactical innovation could reshape outcomes even against experienced armies. The psychological dimension of warfare, public morale, civilian involvement, and the projection of confidence was recognized as equally critical as numerical superiority, a lesson that would echo through Napoleonic campaigns and beyond. What if scenarios naturally rise when considering Valmy's long-term impact? Had Brunswick pressed the attack despite French resilience, Paris may have fallen, and the revolutionary government could have collapsed. Europe's map might have been redrawn under the shadow of restored monarchies, and the ideals of liberty and equality, which now shaped entire societies, could have been suppressed or delayed for decades. Instead, Valmy preserved not only territory, but the ideological momentum that allowed the revolution to flourish, setting the stage for further campaigns, innovations in military organization, and the eventual spread of revolutionary principles beyond France's borders. Maps of subsequent campaigns reflect the enduring consequences of Valmy. Territories once threatened by Prussian advances remained under French control. Troop deployments became more confident, knowing that resilience and strategy could compensate for inexperience. Trade routes stabilized, communication lines improved, and the revolutionary government gained precious time to legislate, organize, and consolidate power. European monarchs, in turn, approached future campaigns with greater caution, aware that France's citizen soldiers were unpredictable, resolute, and capable of extraordinary feats. Valmy's historical memory extended beyond military textbooks. For the French people, it became a symbol of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Annual commemorations, monuments, and artworks celebrated the ideals that the battle had defended: unity, liberty, and the willingness of ordinary individuals to rise for the common good. Generations would recall the drumbeats of that day, the thunder of cannon, and the steadfast eyes of soldiers on the ridges as emblematic of the nation's enduring spirit. In sum, the long-term impact of Valmy was multifaceted: strategic, political, social, economic, and cultural. It preserved the Republic, demonstrated the power of morale and ingenuity in warfare, and reshaped the perceptions of allies and enemies alike. The battle became a living lesson in leadership, courage, and the influence of ideology on military outcomes. Its reverberations would be felt for decades, shaping France's trajectory, inspiring revolutionary movements, and embedding the values of liberty and collective resolve into the nation's very identity. The Battle of Valmy stands as a testament to the unpredictable alchemy of courage, strategy, and ideology. In a single day, on a fog-laden ridge in Champagne, the fate of France and, by extension, the revolutionary movement was determined. What makes Valmy decisive is not merely the halt of the Prussian advance, but the affirmation that a nation, even one fragmented by internal upheaval, could unify under shared ideals to withstand the might of Europe's most formidable armies. History often measures victories by territory gained or lost. Valmy measures itself by spirit preserved, by the triumph of resolve over fear. Strategically, Valmy teaches timeless lessons. Terrain, properly understood and exploited, can transform disadvantage into advantage. Artillery, when positioned thoughtfully, magnifies both physical and psychological impact. Commanders who balance decisiveness with calm composure like Kellermann can inspire troops in moments of terror, turning uncertainty into cohesion. Similarly, the battle underscores the value of morale, of a citizenry that fights not for pay but for purpose. Ideology, when combined with tactical intelligence, becomes a force multiplier, a lesson as relevant to generals as it is to leaders in any sphere where human commitment defines outcomes. Leadership lessons resonate clearly. Delmorias and Kellermann demonstrate that flexibility and observation are as crucial as orders and formations. Brunswick's caution, while tactically sound, illustrates the dangers of underestimating the intangible qualities of an enemy: resilience, determination, and belief. In modern terms, Valmy suggests that preparation, understanding of human psychology, and recognition of the opponent's motivations can shift outcomes even in seemingly asymmetrical confrontations. Valmy's societal lessons are equally profound. Ordinary citizens, given purpose and opportunity, can shape the course of history. Communities supporting armies, whether through logistics, intelligence, or morale, become active participants in defining a nation's destiny. The battle reinforced a new social contract in France, that the protection of liberty was not the sole province of kings or generals, but a collective responsibility, a shared duty that could manifest in extraordinary acts of courage and endurance. Emotionally, Valmy leaves an enduring imprint. One can imagine standing on those hills today, wind whispering through the fields, remembering the deafening cannon roar, the acrid smoke of battle, and the determined faces of soldiers who held their ground against one of Europe's finest armies. It is a reminder that history is shaped as much by the human heart as by maps, armies, and treaties. The courage displayed at Valmy echoes across centuries, urging reflection on the power of conviction, the cost of freedom, and the resilience of a people united by a shared vision. In broader terms, Valmy symbolizes the pivot from old-world hierarchy to modern political consciousness. It shows that a republic, fragile and contested, can survive under extraordinary pressure. It affirms that military victories are inseparable from social, political, and ideological currents. For leaders, it is a reminder that understanding the values and beliefs of those one leads or faces is as critical as understanding logistics or tactics. As the sun sets over Valmy, the ridges quiet but carry the weight of history. The battlefield becomes a mirror reflecting courage, strategy, and human endurance. Monuments would rise, stories would be told, and the ideals defended on that ridge would ripple through generations. In essence, Valmy is not merely a battle to study, it is a lesson to experience, to carry forward, and to honor. The French citizen soldiers, the generals who guided them, and the civilians who witnessed their courage remind us of a simple but profound truth. The defense of ideals often demands more than strategy. It requires heart, unity, and unwavering resolve. And though centuries have passed, the echo of that day still resonates, reminding us that history can indeed be changed in a heartbeat.